Hi everyone. I can see there are a few people that have joined. I hope you're doing well. If you had an inset day today, then I hope that you're feeling raring to go, ready to get back to it. And if you were back in school today, then I hope that you had a good first day back. This session is a bit different to the other sessions that we've done, just because I don't have any pre-prepared slides. I don't have any pre-prepared presentation. This is just about any questions that you have. So, use the chat. That's really important. Again, that's the whole point of this this kind of setup, so that you're able to actually ask questions and have them answered, or I can direct you to the best place to get the answer. As I've said in all the other sessions, this is public, so please don't share any identifying information. There are people from different schools here, several different schools, so please don't share any information about your teachers, don't share any information about your school, nothing identifiable, please, and also keep the chat family friendly. This is going to be a much shorter session than the other ones as well, and will be entirely guided by you in the chat. So if no one responds, or if no one writes anything in the chat, I'll just assume that that everything's been covered. And if that's the case, I'll just briefly go through where to get some resources, where to access resources, and just a rough idea of again, basics of the exam, what the exam timings look like. But obviously, if you do have questions, then please pop them in the chat, and I'll be able to answer them. So Wednesday morning will be your exam. You will need your candidate number for that. You will likely have already been given your candidate number. If you've not been given your candidate number, it will be printed on your exam hall seating plan. And that seating plan will be up somewhere by the exam hall. So you just need to go and check where you're sat. It is really important that you sit in the right place, especially for this exam. And it's important that you sit in the right place because there are foundation and higher tier papers for this. So for different exams, like for example, for English language, everyone sits the same paper. So it is important you sit in the right place, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. But there is the risk, if you sit in the wrong place, that you'll end up with the wrong paper. If you, if something happens, there's some sort of logistical error and you end up with the wrong paper anyway, you do just ask and you get the right paper. It's really not that big a deal. But just to keep things smooth, make your life easier, make other people's lives easier, it is important that you sit in the right spot. There will be lots of people around to help you. You will have exam invigilators. There'll be sort of the chief invigilators that'll be at the front, and they'll be the ones who will run the exam. But there'll be lots of other people helping you. If you've got any questions, you can ask them. If your pen runs out, you can ask them for a spare. If you, need an extra answer booklet, if you fill up your answer booklet and you need an extra one, then again, they'll have that for you. So they're there to make sure that you're not cheating, but they're also there to help you. So use them. They can't give you the answers, obviously, but if you just need a bit of encouragement, or if you need someone to help you calm down a bit, if you're feeling really nervous, then again, you can talk to them. This is, for a lot of you, your first exam experience, so you can use that if you need to. And everyone tends to be sort of really supportive for this exam as well. And you'll be surprised, I think, how fast the time goes, in a good way, not in a kind of running out of time to answer your questions kind of way. The time goes fast, and I think you'll be surprised as well at how fast your brain works in that environment. It is surprising how a little bit of adrenaline, I think sometimes we're a bit scared of that slightly anxious feeling, that nervous feeling, but actually it can be really useful and is can be harnessed to great effect. So, when you're going in and writing under these timed pressurized conditions, you'll be surprised at the amount that you are able to produce and how fast you're able to think. And I think learners tend to be quite surprised at the amount that they've retained, the amount they've managed to learn and then get down onto the paper. And quite often they're disappointed that they're not able to sort of show off more of their skills, because the unfortunate side effect of an exam is that they're only ever going to test a small sample of the knowledge that you've gained. So that's kind of just some of the logistics of the exam. It is always recommended to bring in a spare pen and things like that. But like I said, pretty much every single scenario has, number one, happened before, and number two, will be catered for and helped by the invigilators that are there. So don't kind of panic about any of those logistics. I know some people sort of really get hyped up and sort of worried about that side of things. You just worry about the content of your responses and making sure that you know stuff for the exam. That's the most important bit for you. All of the adults involved, right from your teachers in the morning to the invigilators to the exams officers, they're all there to try and make the rest of it as straightforward and easy for you as possible. So don't kind of stress too much about that. Okay, I'll pause. Any questions in the chat? I know there's quite a few of you on tonight. Anyone? No? Not at the moment. So, the exam structure. 20 minutes extract, 40 minutes essay. Remember to turn to the right page. I'm talking on the basis that you're doing of Mice and Men. But if you're doing a different text, then turn to that page. But if it's of Mice and Men, it will be the first page. So you open it on the first page. But just double check that you're reading about Of Mice and Men, that you're reading about George and Lenny and Slim and Curly and everyone else. Okay? Just double check that, because it can, again, be easy to feel like you're turning one page and actually you're turning two or three and so on. So just double check that. That's really important. Relevant information on the front of your pink examination booklets as well. And then put the number of the question in the margin and off you go. You can plan in your pink booklets, your exam booklets. That's absolutely fine. Ideally, you want to put a line through it once you've planned it so that it's clear to the examiner that that's a plan. But most examiners can use their heads and work out what's a plan and what's an essay. So as long as you keep the plan and the essay a little bit separate, then you're fine. So 20 minutes extract, 40 minutes essay. Remember that there's no context needed for the extract, but there is lots of context needed for the essay. But the key thing for the essay is to make sure that that context is relevant. We don't want a history essay. What we want is context relevant to the characters or the themes that you are writing about. And again, our session from a few days ago is online, so you're able to go back through and see some of the notes there for each of those characters. So Of Mice and Men tends to be the more straightforward one. Then for Unseen Poetry tends to be the one that people get a little bit more concerned about. You will have 2 poems. That is at the back of the paper. Don't forget the question. Don't do Of Mice and Men and think you're done. You turn to the back of the paper and you've got Unseen Poetry. And there will be a statement that says both poems are about, or both poets talk about, or in these poems both, or these poems both explore. There'll be a statement that sums up the concept of both of the poems. It's really important that you read that. Generally, that's in bold on the paper, and it's on a line on its own. So make sure that you read that, because that tells you the kind of angle that you need to come from when you're looking at these poems, because poems can be read in a lot of different ways. So make sure that you look at that and use that to guide your reading and your response. Make sure to read the poems. Don't just go in and start analysing them. Read them from start to finish. Read them from punctuation mark to punctuation mark, and then start to do your annotations. And then you've got 20 minutes. That's plenty of time. So you'll be able to do any annotations that you want to. Remember, your brain does work a bit faster in the exam, so 20 minutes will feel like a long time. So do your annotations. They don't need to be super detailed, Instagram worthy. No one's taking photos of them. They just need to make sense to you. So pick out the bits you want to write about, and then off you go. And remember that example I showed you in our last session, we're not looking for chucking in loads and loads and, finding every single thing we can throw terminology at. We're looking for our response to the poem, the mood and atmosphere that's created, the speaker, looking at the title, and the WJEC recommends that process. So have a look at that video as well if that's an area that you are concerned about. I struggle with panic attacks. What would happen if I had one during the exam? The invigilators are there to help. So if this is something, I'd say that if you make your teacher aware of it, I'm assuming that if you do struggle with panic attacks already, then your teacher will be aware of it, or your head of year will be aware of it. So if that happened during the exam, obviously it depends on the kind of panic attack you have. If you are hyperventilating but able to raise your hand, you'd raise your hand and you'd sort of indicate to the invigilator that you were having a bit of trouble, and they would be able to take you out and calm you down. And if you felt then ready to come back in, then you could come back in and you could have your time then. If you did not feel kind of ready, then that's where they would, potentially talk about what, kind of going through special consideration, or, it's going to be very nuanced depending on how severe the attack is and what the attack looks like and how much you sort of recover from it. So if you are someone who has a panic attack and you freeze up, then again, just kind of making sure that you can indicate to the invigilator, but the invigilators kind of move back and forth in the exam hall, so they will be able to see that something's wrong if something is wrong, because that's their job. Obviously their job is to ensure that you're not cheating, but their primary job is to make sure you're okay, so they'll be kind of looking out for that. Quite often, like some schools indicate if there are learners who are kind of more predisposed to things like panic attacks, and you might be placed in a separate room, like a small room, but you would know that in advance. And again, it's exactly the same exam conditions and everything in that smaller room. It's just again designed so that if something happened, then it might be easier to deal with or something. So all of that will be decided by the school. But yeah, if it happened, if you kind of did everything you could, everything was planned, and yet, it kind of sprung up on you, because I know panic attacks, sometimes there's no rhyme or reason as to why they appear. If you're in a general situation of heightened stress, something completely random that has never triggered it before might, So if that happens, just talk to the invigilator. And again, I know it feels like the biggest thing in the world, but they deal with this sort of thing all the time. It's absolutely fine. And at no point would you be disadvantaged because of that. So don't feel concerned about that either. Obviously, in a perfect world, that wouldn't happen to you, but I think part of that anxiety is the unknown. So if you kind of know that, look, worst case scenario, if this does happen, then there are people there who can look after me, and I can still, have a go at my exam, and it's not the end of the world. It's not like I've lost my chance. Knowing that might kind of help, and in turn make it less likely that you have that anxiety in the first place, if that makes sense. And that goes for anything really. If you have any concerns, even if, for example, if you really need the toilet, which I'm sure has been explained to you again already, if you need the toilet, you're allowed to go to the toilet in an exam. The only thing is that you have to be accompanied to the toilet, not kind of in the cubicle or anything. That's weird. But to ensure that you haven't. So they have to take you to the toilet and then bring you back, and that is only because if they didn't do that, there is obviously a risk. Like, they couldn't say that for sure you hadn't left the room and gone to check your notes and then gone back into the hall. So you'll just be taken to the toilet. They'll let you in and then they bring you back again. But there'll be, any kind of situation where you might need to leave the exam hall. You'll be accompanied, and that is partly because of plagiarism and mainly to make sure that you're okay. So we were talking about unseen poetry. Make sure that you write something. Even if you think it's complete rubbish, writing something gives you more chance of marks than not writing anything. And remember, you can write a personal response. You can get a bit creative with it if you don't feel anything towards any of the poems. But if you have a personal experience of something that's mentioned in the poems, then by all means write about that too. Just remember that you're being marked on your ability to respond to the poems, your ability to talk about the language structure, form, style, etc., and then your ability to compare as well. So that's kind of how the exam works. I know that we had a question the other day about keeping time and timings. There will be a massive clock in the exam hall. There will also be someone giving you timings. They're not going to give you loads because that just is going to increase anxiety if they tell you every 5 minutes that you've got 5 minutes less, or 5 minutes closer to the end. But they will give you some key timings just in terms of how where you are in the exam, whether you're halfway through or whatever. You want to spend half your time on Of Mice and Men, and you want to spend half your time on the poetry. People sometimes question why that is, because there's 30 marks available for Of Mice and Men and only 20 marks available for the poetry. The reason why it's split 50-50 is because you need more time on the poetry because you've never seen them before. So that's why you have that 50-50 split. But what that does mean is you do have a little bit of a buffer, a time buffer. That means if you spend a little bit longer on Of Mice and Men, it's not the end of the world, because you've got that 20 minutes where you're reading and annotating the poems. Ideally, you do want the best part of that hour on the poems to get the best chance of maximising your marks there. But equally, if you feel like you've got lots more to say with Of Mice and Men, and you know that your answer is very much unfinished, if you don't spend a bit of extra time on it, then do that. Just bear in mind there's a cap on the amount of marks that you get. So writing a 15-page essay for Of Mice and Men might seem great and might really show off your skills, but you can only get 20 marks for that, which is why we say 2 to 3 sides of A4, because that can get you 20 marks. So you can write more. You can write way more if you want to. And lots of our A&A star learners would write 5 or 6 sides of A4. That's fine. But just remember, it's 20 marks. So it's worth then moving on to the poetry and talking about that, because there's the opportunity of gaining more marks, whereas no matter how much you write for Mice and Men, you're only ever going to get a maximum of 20 marks, right? What type of historical context is best to add in? Okay, so the best way to think about the context for Of Mice and Men is to think about the characters as, rather than kind of real living people, think about them as vehicles for talking about aspects of context. So each character represents kind of an archetype, a particular category of people who lived in 1930s America. So I've got linked our live session, our first live session, which covers, on there I've got kind of a slide for each of the characters. I don't go through Curly's wife in too much detail. There are some bullet points on there, but she's the one that has kind of the least detail, and that's because she came up fairly recently, and also she's fairly straightforward to write about. just in terms of the misogyny, and we covered that kind of earlier in the presentation. But if you have a look at that video, then it's kind of the second half of it, I think. The second half of that video, there's slides that you can kind of pause and have a look at, and each one has context that links to each character. So the best way that I would I'm just trying to find the slides now. The best way that I would kind of approach this question is to look at each of the characters and what they represent about 1930s America. So for example, if we look at the character of Lenny, then Lenny represents the vulnerability of people who were not able to live independently, right? There is no welfare state, so George is the only kind of buffer between him and kind of a really, really difficult life. And actually, Candy is another one where you can see that lack of welfare state means that he really, that he really struggles. He can't retire. There's no kind of pensions. So it's what he represents. So Candy as an old person represents loneliness, low self-esteem, which you can say that about all the ranch workers. It's very typical. He's sexist, he's racist, typical attitudes of the time. He also represents that dreams are unattainable, and we've got that again across a few characters. But what you want to do is kind of take that general idea. So, dreams are unattainable, and it looks like this for Curly's wife, it looks like this for Curly, it looks like this for Candy, it looks like this for Crooks, etc. Emphasizes the vulnerability of ranch workers as they get older. So that's kind of a unique point for him, because they're valued for their physical strength, their physical abilities. So that's why they talk about him like being canned, because he's just not a good money earner. And then he also represents the effects of discrimination, both as a perpetrator, but also as a victim. So in his case, that's age, and also he has a disability. So that's just an example. I don't know, can I show this to you? I don't think I can. Let me see now. Hold on, I'll switch to my other screen. But these are the slides. This is what they look like. And there's ones for each one. Hold on, let me change this screen. And what hopefully they'll do is, let's see if this works. Oh, there we go. I know that looks a little bit odd, but they kind of look like that. Okay, that's what you need to know. So yeah, there's notes for each of them. Okay, now Slim is always a tricky one. Can I show you Slim? Slim is always a tricky one, but what I would say is you can still kind of talk about the same points. You just say that he provides that juxtaposition, he provides that contrast. But also he does embody some of those things. Like he stresses the fact that men are valued for their ability to work well, because he's respected because he's a good worker. And there are some points where it kind of emphasizes that harsh and violent world, because he is a really sympathetic character, and he's very sensitive to other people's feelings and needs, but he still is quite kind of hardlined about what needs to be done. If you think about the puppies, for example, like what needs to be done there. Sides of A4, individual sides. Can you go on both sides of one page? So the booklet, every time I say this, I then look around for a booklet that I wish I had. I did used to have pink exam booklets, but I can't find them now. So the booklets are, they're kind of basically A4 lined paper with quite wide margins, pink margins. So it's slightly less actually than a page of A4 writing on a side of the exam booklet. Yes, you can write on both sides. And when I'm talking about 2 to 3 sides of A4, I'm talking about sort of one side of a page. So like, okay, if I can do this, like 1, and then the other side of this will be 2 and 3. So 2 to 3 sides is not loads, and you may end up writing more, and that's fine. The point that I'm trying to make, I suppose, is what can happen is you can spend an hour and 45 minutes on Of Mice and Men, and you can fill up 2 exam booklets and write 40 sides of A4 if you wanted to. And that's lovely, but you're only ever going to get a maximum of 30 marks doing that. Whereas if you consolidate your ideas, if you cherry pick and write about the best ones, write less, and then move on and look at the poetry, then there's more marks available there. So just invest that time and energy wisely on the questions in comparison to the marks that they have. So the extract is, we say 20 minutes because it's worth 10 marks. You could spend an hour on it if you wanted to. You could squeeze every last drop of analysis out of it if you wanted to, but you're only ever going to get 10 marks. So there's no point. You could write PhD level, degree level theses on these characters in Of Mice and Men, but you're only ever going to get 20 marks. So think, the timings are there because you want to get the maximum amount of marks available in the exam as a whole. That's all. But you can write on both sides of the booklet. We'd encourage you to do that. Just think of it like an exercise book, because that's all it is. And it's yours. You can write, you can plan. Some people like to take a whole kind of side in their exam books to plan and then start their essay on the next page. Again, you can do that. Your plans can look however you want. They can be a mind map. They can be, they can be bullet points. They can be, storyboards if you want them to. Like whatever works best for you. Your plans can look however you want. No one's going to judge there, and they don't affect your marks. So do it however you want, whatever works. Would it be better to start with the poetry than Of Mice and Men? I would say no. The caveat to that is that I say this at the start of every session, and I don't think I said it at the start of this one. What I say and what I'm doing here is designed to supplement your classroom teaching. So if your teacher in your class has said that doing the poetry first is best, then you do that. That's absolutely fine. Personally, for me, I would do Of Mice and Men first, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it is your first exam, so you want something to build your confidence and get you into the swing of things to start you off, right? And if the very first thing you approach is something you've never seen before, then you might lose confidence, and that might then affect your kind of confidence in approaching Of Mice and Men. Even though you would be approaching it absolutely fine, it would kind of maybe affect your approach towards it. Secondly, the unseen poetry, the fact that it's unseen, it's a lot easier to kind of spend more time on it than you need to. So with Of Mice and Men, you will be surprised how much you remember and how much you can write in a very short amount of time, because you know these characters, you know this text very well. And if you do Of Mice and Men first, you do the extract, you build your confidence, you do the essay, you're pulling things together, and again, you're practicing that essay structure with content that you're really confident with. Which means by the time you're approaching the unseen poetry, you're already thinking analytically. You've already thought about how to construct an argument because you've just done it with the essay. And then you're simply applying those skills that you've very, very recently used with something that you are not familiar with, which is those unseen poems themselves, right? So the paper is designed for you to do the bit that you're confident with and then move on to the bit that you're less confident with. It's designed to kind of build like that. And that way as well, it's a lot easier for you to stick to those timings and to again maximize the marks in the exam. So I would always recommend doing of mice and men first. I get it. There's a saying, I think it's a French saying that literally translates to eat the frog. You might have heard of it, where you kind of do the thing that you want to do least first to get it done and out of the way. And I can't remember why it's called eat the frog. There's a reason. But in this case, I would suggest build your confidence up, get your brain working and practicing those skills, and then apply those skills to the poetry afterwards. So that's what I would suggest. Okay. I'll give it another few minutes to see, because I know there are a few other people on the chat as well. What are the most common mistakes? Do you mean, I suppose there's kind of two ways of looking at this. Most common mistakes in terms of the exam in general, or most common mistakes in terms of answering the questions? So like, common mistakes in the exam would be turning to the wrong question and trying to answer the wrong question. That's happened. Trying to answer all the questions for all of the texts on the paper. That's also happened. Forgetting about the poetry also happened. Yeah, those are things that you really want to try and avoid, just because they're easy. They're easy things to fix. Common mistakes in the exam. So common mistakes in the exam would be not using all of the extract. And what I mean by that is taking quotes from like the first paragraph and then realising perhaps that you've run out of time and then not doing anything for the rest of it. I've often spoken about, and I think I said it in the Mice and Men session, that there is a reason why the examiners selected the extract to start where it starts and end where it ends. So try and get a quotation from the opening few lines and the closing few lines, because there will be something there to talk about, and it means that you're covering all of the extract as well. So you don't need to pick something from every line, but you need to look at it. You need to look at the beginning, middle and end, right? You need to make sure that your evidence is spread throughout all of the extract. So that's quite a common one for the extract. It's sometimes we see people who end up just retelling the story instead of analysing in the extract question. Quite easily done. The easiest way to avoid doing that is to have a one sentence introduction that places the extract in the story. So you give yourself one sentence to tell us where in the story this extract takes place, and then you jump straight in with that evidence. Then in the essay, the most common mistake is to not include context and just to talk about the characters and bring in some quotations. And that's lovely, but you will struggle to get a C grade or above if you do not use context for the essay question. You might still get a C on the exam as a whole, but you will struggle to get a C if you don't include context. You are more likely, so you need both things, right? You need evidence and you need context, but you're more likely to get a higher grade by including relevant context than including quotations. So that's how important context is. You need to make sure that context is in there. Another mistake is to kind of go too far the other way and to just talk about context and to not really talk about the characters or the themes, and to kind of avoid that AO1 and that focus on of Mice and Men, because this is an English literature examination. It's not a history examination. So that's why hopefully those slides that I've shared on the other session will be useful to you, because they show you it's that connection between precise contextual reference and the characters themselves. And it's not about kind of using those slides and just copying and pasting them. It's about, because that's that's not actually that useful. But it's about getting you to think about moments in the story where these things happen. So, like moments in the story where Slim is described in a really sort of positive way and it's clear that people really respect him, then there's a link that you've been given that's contextual, but you can think of the moments in the story that embody that, right? So making those connections is really important. Common errors with the poetry, only writing about one poem and not having time to write about both. And lots of these mistakes often happen because of timing rather than intention. So managing your time is important. But yeah, talking about just one poem and then maybe giving a token line or two to the other, you'll still get marks, so don't panic about that. There will still be marks given, but obviously you're going to lose marks, or not lose marks, you won't be able to gain any comparison marks, okay? Which actually leads me on to another point. You can't lose marks in an exam. The examiner's job is to give you marks. You can't have marks taken away, if that makes sense. If you write something kind of wrong, it tends to just be ignored rather than you don't get marked down for that, if that makes sense. You just can't gain a mark rather than losing a mark. I don't know if that makes too much sense, but the idea is that markers mark positively. They have to be looking to give you marks. That's how examiners work. How do I start the comparison of the two poems? There is a video, again, there's another whole video on the approach to poetry. And again, I just try and see if I can find my slides. There's another video that kind of talks through that whole process, but there is a fairly useful resource, looks a bit like a knowledge organizer from the WJEC, that talks about the process. So what they suggest is when you're looking at the comparison, that you start with the title, and you compare the titles as a starting point, and then you start to move through, maybe look at the speaker, and who, if they're speaking to someone, and again, just a little bit of the context of the poem, and then looking at the language, so things like the lexical set or semantic fields, the kind of the words that are used to create mood and atmosphere in the poem, and then you can of course look at structure and things like that. But title is quite a good place to start, because you're going to have to introduce the poems anyway, and you'll introduce them using the titles, so starting your comparison with the title is probably a good way for it. Some schools recommend that you talk about one poem and then compare back to the other. That can work. If you're confident with timing, that can work. I would recommend that you go back and forth. You might have done differently for your poetry coursework, but I would recommend for the exam you would go back and forth between the poems, and the reason for that is timing. That's it. So for timing, you want to make sure you're getting those comparison marks in, and you don't want to suddenly be left with 5 minutes and realise that you haven't written anything about poem number 2. So yeah, check the other video, because it talks through that process. And there's also, again, you can kind of, you don't need to watch all of it, you can just scrub through and you'll be able to find, there's a slide that's got kind of blue boxes on it, dark blue boxes, and there's the comparative connectives on there. So if you're looking at ways at sentence level to compare the poems, then that's on there too. Okay, hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, then obviously you can add more in the chat as well. I'll give it another couple of minutes. Resource wise, if you're looking for something for some last minute revision, the live streams of both of the sessions that I've done, one for the Of Mice and Men and one for the Unseen Poetry, both of those are up on the YouTube channel. But if you're looking for something that's a little bit more portable and on the go, then we're primarily leaning the right way. We're primarily a podcast. So there's podcast episodes, one for the essay, one for the extract, and one for the Unseen Poetry. so 3 podcast episodes, and they're just audio. There's nothing visual. They're not video podcasts or anything. So if you're looking for something that's kind of on the go, something on the way to school or on the way back, or if you're looking for something that you can just have on in the background while you're doing chores or whatever, then that might be useful. And they're obviously a bit more bite-sized as well. There's also podcast episodes for all of the characters of Mice and Men. And I believe, I'm trying to think now, I believe there's ones on dreams and loneliness as well. There might be another one. I can't remember. It was a long time ago that I made them. But there's definitely ones for dreams and loneliness, which are the 2 main themes and link so much to lots of the others that hopefully kind of they will be useful in a thematic for thematic revision anyway. But there's those podcasts that are available. You might have to kind of scroll back a bit because there's lots of the Unit 2 stuff is on there as well. So yeah, you might have to scroll back a bit because they're some of the older episodes, but they are on there. And hopefully they'll give you a little bit of a boost if there's a particular character that you're struggling with or something. And then, yeah, for the exam technique and exam skills, you've got the essay, the extract, and the unseen poetry episodes that you can listen to as well. I'm always looking to try and find out what else people want. Usually I ask people in the classroom, which is what I will do when I get back in the classroom. But right now, any feedback through Spotify or through Apple Podcasts, because that's where we are, is really useful, because if they're not useful, then I'll spend my time doing something else that is more useful for you. So yeah, any feedback on those is greatly appreciated, but if nothing else, they're just there as a revision tool if they're helpful. And again, just trying to give you different formats, because I know revision works differently for different people. So yeah, check them out. Spotify and Apple Podcasts should have them. And you can also then, if you're feeling really keen, Wednesday afternoon on the way home from school, get ahead and start listening to an Inspector Calls. There'll be more Inspector Calls ones going up once Unit 1's over. But for now, there's a few episodes on there on characters too. Okay, so hopefully those resources will be useful to you. I have considered, so I make resources and share them with teachers to use in classrooms, but I've also got some resources some paper resources that might be useful. So I'm again happy to share some of those things. This is kind of looking ahead now, happy to share some of those things if they would be useful to people for things like an Inspector Calls, but I'll kind of take people's lead on that. Otherwise I'm just carry on with the podcast if it is useful to you. And we'll be doing these live sessions as well for Unit 2. We'll try and sort of spread them out a bit more. I know this one's been quite intense because we've been doing them every other day, but I'll try and spread them out and do maybe a weekly live session in the few weeks in the lead up to that Unit 2, just so if you can't attend revision after school, you've got another option that might work for whatever your day looks like. Okay, any final questions in the chat? Thank you to those people who've asked questions. It's been really, really useful, and I guarantee the people who've asked questions in the chat, the questions that you've asked would have been thought of by many people who are watching and who haven't used the chat. And like I said, this is recorded and then goes on YouTube, so people watching afterwards will find those messages really useful as well. So thank you very, very much for that. Any final comments? Give it just one last minute, because I can see there's still a few people on here. And please let me know. So this is the first time I've done live sessions like this, because the intention is that this gives you an alternative or in addition to revision where you stay after school. Because revision after school works really well for some people, but for others, they kind of need to come home, take a break, and then jump into revision a bit later on. So the live sessions were kind of set up with that intention. So please let me know if you think they're useful, or if you think they work for you, because if they do, great, I'll carry on doing them. But if you'd rather just have after school revision and be done with it, then I can spend this time, I don't know, recording a bit more of the podcast or something as well. Okay. So chat is quiet, so I'm guessing that all questions have been answered. To the people that are still on here, I'm guessing that all the questions have been answered. Not at all. Thank you for your commitment to logging on. I know that this feels really daunting. This is my final message now, and then I'll log off and leave you in peace, right? I know this can feel really daunting. For the vast majority of you, this is the first exam that you've done, and it probably feels quite scary, or at least anxiety inducing, because it's the unknown. But I promise you, everyone who's involved, all the adults involved, their main priority is to make sure that you're okay. And they're really aware that this can be a really intimidating experience. But ultimately, sure, you're in a weird echoey room and it's probably going to be a bit chilly. And sure, you know, you're going to be sat and it's a bit echoey and a bit strange, and your table's much smaller than you used to. And you can't put your hand up and ask for help in quite the same way. But when you look at those questions on that paper, you know those characters, you know those themes, you know this. And when it comes to the poetry, sure, you might not know exactly what poems are going to come up, but you do know how to analyse poetry. You've done that before. And remember, because I talked about this a lot in the last session, the unseen poetry, the most important thing is to write something, because you will get marks. It's marked very generously, and it's marked very generously because the examiners know they're asking a lot of you. So the quality of analysis that you usually engage with when it comes to poetry is going to be higher than what's expected of you in this exam as well. So you've totally got it. You know this. You know this content, you know how to answer these questions because you've been doing it in class since September, and you've been practicing these skills implicitly for years and years and years beforehand, even if you didn't realise it. So yes, the experience can be intimidating. Everyone's in the same boat. Everyone will feel intimidated. They'll show it in different ways. Some people will act super confident and tell you that they've got all the answers and they did this and they did that. And they're doing that because they're actually quite intimidated by the experience. Some people will be very, very quiet. Some people will bite their nails. Some people will cry. Some people will buy 4 slices of pizza and eat those for breakfast, because everyone deals with this in a different way. But ultimately, you're all in it together. And everyone sitting this exam across the country is feeling exactly the same. And all you can control in this moment is you going in knowing that you know these characters, you know how to write these essays, and you are going to do the very best that you can. And then what else can anyone ask of you, right? If the very best that you can do is 5 lines per question, then that's fine. You've done it. You've done your best. If you are going in there and you just give all you can give on that day, no one can ask anything more of you, and everyone involved is going to be really proud of what you've done. So just think about this as this first examination experience. Absolute worst case scenario, and you do absolutely terribly and you're kicking yourself as you come out, you can resit in the summer. Okay, it's really not the end of the world, and that again happens all the time. I know that one year I've worked in a school where I think something like 40% of the cohort ended up resitting, and and it was because lots of them had simply turned to the wrong question. It was something as simple as that. They just turned to the wrong question. So, and they all came out with okay marks in the end. So there's so many ways around this all the time. It's not this kind of big terminal endpoint like people think it is. And the most important thing is that you go in there and you try your best. And that's all we can ask of you. And try and eat something for breakfast so that you don't feel a bit fuzzy, even if you don't think you need it. So you don't feel a bit fuzzy in the exam. And also you don't get that horrible thing where it's really quiet and then your stomach starts rumbling really loudly, because that can be really distracting for you and for everyone else. So try and get yourself some breakfast. Go and get a banana from the canteen or something before you start. All right, I will leave you to it. Absolute best of luck. If you have the time and inclination, come back onto one of these videos after the exam and let me know how it went and how you did, because I'd really love to know. For those of you who are from a particular school, I'll be seeing you in person very soon. For those of you from other schools, thank you so much for joining. Thank you all for your commitment. You're doing the right things, and I'm sure it'll pay dividends when you have a really, really positive exam experience on Wednesday morning. So best of luck. Enjoy school tomorrow, and absolute best of luck for Wednesday. I'll be rooting for you. All right. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you back here at some point soon for some Unit 2 chat and revision as well. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'll leave you to it now. Have a great evening and see you soon. Best of luck. Bye-bye.